All right, so I'll introduce myself and then I'll break down kind of how we're going to go through this. We only have 40 minutes. This is a free Zoom call, so I'm testing this out. So it's a pretty hard stop at 2:10, I believe it is. Um, so basically, yeah, my name's Brian. I'm an avid forager. I've been doing this for years and years, been teaching really, really consistently for the past year, and just wanting to figure out ways to give more people this information. Like, it's such a relevant time to be dealing with, sourcing our own food. And then, aside from that, like, it's not just about this time, it's like at all times this food is amazing. Like, the stuff we're going to talk about are choice edibles, things you cannot buy in a grocery store, and things that have not been genetically altered over the course of years. So really what we're dealing with is edibles that are actually more nutritious and have amazing culinary uses right beside their store-bought counterparts. There's been studies out of UC Berkeley that have shown that these edibles we're talking about, for the most part, are not only amazing for us, um, but are actually not contaminated. So if you want to look into that study, it's through BFI. And they studied a lot of the edibles that we're going to be discussing today and did, soil samples and then tissue samples of the actual plants. And they determined that they're just like amazingly nutritious and they were not contaminated, which was a really, really surprising finding because most people, the common knowledge was you don't forage from urban environments. I've been doing it for years. I'm totally fine. So I hope that you will, have an interest as well after we talk a little bit more about it. So yeah, feel free if, I'm going over something and you have a question or you want to jump in with a comment, feel free to type in. And like I was saying earlier, I can unmute people um, if anyone wants to like speak rather than type too. So just feel free to interrupt. I'll do my best to kind of screen comments as we're going through. But basically, we're going to look into 3 different really common wild edibles that you can find this time of year. And I have 3 videos queued up from me in field actually finding these plants, showing where they're growing, talking about how to harvest them, how to identify them, a bit on how to cook them. And we're going to also talk a bit about sustainability of harvesting all the plants, which is kind of built into um, each video, hopefully. And if you have more questions about that, feel free to ask. It's a really important part. But each plant has their own reproductive cycle and their own way of proliferating themselves. And I think the best gift that we can give to those plants is to learn their cycles of reproduction. And then, let's see, just to give y'all a couple of resources, if you're really, really interested in how to prepare wild plants, I cook. I'm not a great cook, but I work with these plants a lot in the kitchen. And I'm just a saute kind of person. I saute things a lot. I fry things a lot. And steaming things as well. But there's a guy by the name of Pascal Bauder, and I'll type his name in so that people can follow him. If you want to get into some real amazing culinary stuff, check him out on Instagram, Facebook, and he has several books out. I'm reading this book right now by him. It's called The Wild Crafted Brewer, and it's about brewing herbal beers from your local world and from actually like capturing wild yeast and stuff. It's pretty advanced. So if you're into the culinary stuff and want to learn some really interesting ways, let's see. And lastly, I have a little bit of music playing. If that's, I don't know how that sounds on y'all's end, but I like to just have some chill music. If it's distracting, let me know and I can totally turn it down or pause it. But if there's no questions, I don't hear any music, you're good. Okay, cool. If there's no further questions or inquiries, we can jump right into the first video. So we're going to be talking about wild radish. All right, I'm going to share my screen with y'all. So hopefully this will work and I'll be able to full screen it. And this is a video that I took. So turn that down a little bit, pardon me. This is a video that I took in Oakland near Merritt College, and we're going into wild radish. Okay, so how do I share that one? Here it is. Everyone, so I'm doing a quick video on how to harvest wild radish greens and also how to identify this plant. So let's get right to it. We got a hillside full of radish right here. A lot of radish, a lot of flowers, and check out the cool purples. Then I want to show you one more plant. This one's interesting. It's a lot lighter. It's like a bigger colored flower. They're all wild radish, just slightly different morphology. We'll also see some with white flowers as well. Now, first thing we got to do is know how to identify it before we start talking about edibility. And one great way to identify it is by the flowers. We're not going to always have the flowers to identify it. It's a smaller green. But if you do have the flowers, it's pretty dang easy. That cruciferous shape, it looks like a cross, right? And this is a cruciferous vegetable. It's in the Brassicaceae family with broccoli, kale, collards, etc. So it's going to have that cross-shaped flower with 4 petals on it. And like I said, that flower can be different colors. It's going to look pretty much like that. And then when it has unopened flower buds, they're going to look like that. It's like little broccoli, right? Like broccoli rapini or something. And can be treated the same culinarily. But let's stick with the ID for now. I want you guys to see how this plant is growing, the kind of overall look of it. They start to get pretty big and wiry once they go to flower. So they look different than when they're small, of course, but the leaves look pretty much the same throughout. And they have sharp toothed edges. They're hairy. They'll often have this reddish vein going through them. And the leaves will break all the way back to the stem, back to the leaf stem, right? There's also wild mustard, which is edible and delicious and very, very closely related to wild radish. And its leaves will typically not break all the way back to the stem. So that's one way to identify it. Plus the taste is more mustardy rather than radishy. All right, so let's keep exploring this patch. And let's talk a bit about how to harvest it. So once you know you have wild radish, make sure you know what you're dealing with, as always, with everything wild, with everything you eat in general. Yeah, I just come in, I'm just going to take a few leaves from many plants. We have so many plants here, there's no reason to strip the whole plant out. You could do that if you want to eradicate it as well, but it all depends on your context. But here, I don't really know this land too good, and I want to just take a few leaves. So I'm okay taking leaves from flowering plants. With a lot of garden vegetables, the leaves are not so good once they flower. A lot of wild plants, not necessarily the case. There are always exceptions to every rule. But yeah, I'm just taking a few leaves. Take those home and make a real nice stir fry from them. Really great to cook with, and they lose a lot of that kind of tangy radishiness once they're cooked, which is nice. And I wouldn't necessarily recommend eating them raw. They're pretty intense to try to eat raw. Some people might like it, but it's a little much for me, so I prefer to cook them. And another thing you could do with them is you could use those little pods, those unopened flower buds, I should say, not pods. And you could basically do anything you want to do that would require broccoli with these. They're going to be spicier. They're not going to taste exactly like broccoli. They're going to have a zing to them, but function much in the same way. So it's another cool use. And one more thing, I'm going for these that are much bigger. You can tell that these have gotten good moisture and are growing really well. Now let's go up the hill just a little bit on our foraging adventure and see some radishes that are just exhibiting different characteristics. And we can talk about why. So there's our patch, same plant. Like I said, there's some with white flowers. All right. And what you'll notice about these plants is that they're much smaller than the ones we were just dealing with.
they're more at the top of the hill. They're not getting as much moisture, but they haven't grown as big. Their greens are tougher. They're more offensive to the taste buds and are just generally not as succulent. Doesn't mean they might, they might be full of even more phytochemicals. If they had a tougher life, they might be even better. But as far as culinary use, not necessarily as great to use culinarily as the bigger leaves. So I'm sticking to the bigger leaves mainly, but these have some really beautiful flowers. Just want to get a good contrast of white. Those are kind of light purple, white. And those pink ones, beautiful purple ones back here too. So it's very neat. Nature is abundant. And I'll sign off from here. And if you have questions about wild radish, let me know. And if you have any feedback for me or want to let me know what you're harvesting or what you like to do with wild radish, always appreciated. All right, until next time. Happy harvests. Peace.
So cool. So everyone was able to see that, I hope. Cool. Head nods. Good. It's so strange not having feedback from people as you're like doing this stuff. I can kind of see you guys, but I'm still figuring all this out. So thank you. Thank you. Any questions about wild radish? Did anyone know that one beforehand? Is that new for people? Hopefully you learned a little something. I'm not sure if y'all caught that. We can spend maybe a minute or two just dissecting it if anyone has any questions. But yeah, just so, I don't know if y'all caught that part about wild radish and wild mustard towards the beginning, but they're very, very similar plants, often growing right next to each other in similar environments. And you might be wondering, like, where do you find these plants as well? Both of those are edible, and both of those are fairly the same culinarily and look very similar. Wild mustard will have yellow flowers typically, and the flowers have more bunches rather than singular flowers. If you're wanting to go out and find that plant, just go to hillsides that are open, places that have been grazed. If you happen to live in the East Bay, going up into the hills and like Tilden and whatnot is considered to be a very noxious weed up there. So you can often find wild mustard and wild radish in abundance in those kind of places, any kind of cleared out fields, anywhere that's been reset to like annual vegetables. So it's a really common one. Yeah, exactly. Okay, cool. Got a couple of questions. Are you aware of any plants that look like radish? Not really. It's a pretty easy one. It's a pretty good beginner foraging plant because aside from mustard, wild mustard, which is also totally edible and choice, there's not a whole lot that's going to look a lot like it. Once you have the flowers, and if you caught it in the beginning, those crosses, they're called cruciferous vegetables because they have a cross, right? And the flowers is 4 petals. Those are all in the Brassicaceae family. So they're all like broccoli, collards, kale. Those are all like very similar plants. And once you have a flower, if you're like really first time foraging something and you're feeling a little bit iffy about it, it's nice to have a flower to look at because that can help you to identify it. If you were just getting wild radish earlier in the season when it's just the basal rosette on the ground, just the greens, it might be a little bit more iffy for you. But just like looking at how those leaves look, there's not a whole lot you're gonna confuse it with. Nothing that I would be like deadly concerned about. So it's a pretty easy one. And yeah, best place to find wild radish, like I was saying, just looking in places that are, old fields next to college campuses, places like that. Places, and like I was showing in the video too, places lower in the landscape, thinking about how water flows, you're gonna find specimens that are more choice. You saw as I moved up the hillside, there's less moisture and those plants are farther from the edge and they were a lot smaller and those were not the choice specimens. Usually when you're on the edge of a habitat, you're gonna find the best stuff. That's also when you're running into like parking lots and stuff too. So wash your greens, but other than that, you should be fine. So don't see any other questions. So I'm gonna jump into our second video. And I think we're running pretty good on time right now. If anyone has any other feedback before I go into this, I can't see the chat once the video's up. So I can see y'all's faces once the video is running. So if you had something that like felt really pressing, because this next video is about 8 minutes, we're gonna be talking about mallow. If you wanted to raise your hand, I could perhaps pause because this video is a bit more lengthy. So I'd be more than willing to do that. If someone really has a question and wants to like hold a hand up, I'll be checking y'all's faces a little bit. All right, so let's jump into this one. Looks like everyone's here. Cool. All right, so I'm going to share screen and we're going to go into how to identify and eat mallow, which is an amazing plant. Here we go. Oh, let's see. Okay, so I'm introducing y'all to a common urban weed today that is actually a very delicious, very nutritious plant that is often overlooked as an edible, but it's one you should definitely know. So I'm going to introduce y'all to my friend. This is called mallow, often called malva as well, or cheeseweed. We'll get into some of those common names in a bit, but this plant is huge. Okay, so this is not necessarily the most common version of it. There's some versions of it that are really small, that grow very low to the ground, and there's some that are kind of in between this, but this one's like almost 10 feet tall up there. So just check out the structure of this one. This is quite a large one. When it comes to species level identification of this plant, there's a lot of crossing that happens, and it can be a bit tough to actually identify what species it is. Some of the common ones are Malva neglecta, Malva sylvestris, and there's many more that occur in California and across the world, actually. It's a pretty common weed, like I said. But let's figure out how to identify it by the leaves, okay? No matter if it's a small specimen or a really large or an in between size. The leaves are going to look pretty similar across the board. So check it out. All right, so things you'll notice about this leaf are one, that it has a nice long leaf stem or a nice long petiole, okay? There's some hairiness going on in that petiole too. Now move up to the leaf, there's going to be some hairiness on the leaf, and it's also quite palmate. So it looks kind of like a palm. And it has basically 5 lobes to it, if you look around the leaf. And then it's going to have toothed edges too, all right? So make sure you have those teeth. Now, if you follow the veins, they're going to terminate at this point at the bottom where the leaf meets the leaf stem. And they're going to have this purplish reddish tint going on right here, this little spot of purplish reddishness. All right, hopefully you can see that okay. And that's a good indicator. Now, something else that this plant will quite often have, but not always, you see there's orange splotches on there, all right? There's some orange splotching going on, these kind of like little raised bumps on the back. So this is called hollyhock rust. It's a really common rust, which is like a pathogenic fungus that happens in these kind of plants. Now, I've eaten plenty of these. I've done research on this. I've fed this to plenty of people, and I've never had any problem or heard anything suggesting that this kind of rust would be dangerous in humans. It's not great for the plant, but it seems to be fine for humans. And this plant gets rave reviews whenever we cook it. So we can talk a little bit about cooking the leaves. I go real simple with these. I just like to stir fry them in some oil. Super good. Tastes a lot like spinach. Has a ton of calcium in it. 25% more calcium than milk, apparently. And you can just taste it. The vitamins and minerals are there. It's something that your body really enjoys for most people. And yeah, so what else? Oh, if you're going to harvest these leaves, it's better to do it young. This plant, like I said, huge. It's flowering, it's seeding. The leaves are going to be a bit tougher. If you get it younger before it starts to flower and make these huge shoots, you're going to have more succulent, tender leaves to deal with. These are still perfectly edible, but might require a little bit more cooking. You might want to steam them a bit before you saute them, or just steam them for a long time to really soften them up. They're totally edible and totally good, even if they're a little bit tough. Other parts of the plant that are edible include the flowers. All right, so check out those flowers. You got a purplish whitish going on. They're quite large on the specimen. 5 petals, and they're absolutely amazing to add to a salad just to brighten it up. So petals are also edible. One thing you should note, of course, is that if you're taking all the petals off of a plant, you're going to stop it from seeding. Those petals are going to turn into seeds and would eventually reproduce the plant. So it's like that with pretty much all plants.
If you start taking the flowers, you're stopping it from reproducing, which might be something you want to do with this plant. It's considered a noxious weed in many places. I consider it to be really delicious and prime. But, you know, in certain places, people might be wanting to eradicate it or bring it into a balance, and actually removing those reproductive parts would be good in that circumstance. But if you're wanting the plant to reproduce, you want to leave some flowers on also for the pollinators that are enjoying it. And yeah, now speaking of reproductive parts, let's talk about the seeds for a moment. Check out how the seeds come off the leaf axils in little clusters, and the seed pods have a stem to them as well. And they have this kind of star look going on if you check out the sheath of that seed. Now, if you open up that seed, which I have an open one right here, we're going to find out why this plant is sometimes called cheeseweed. Because this seed looks a lot like a cheese wheel, right? Now, this doesn't taste like cheese. This is a totally vegan food, but it does look kind of like a cheese wheel. But this is actually my favorite part to eat of the plant. So I'll take these unripe seeds, and you know they're unripe because they're green and they're soft. But I'll take these and I'll stir fry them, and they taste almost identical to okra. You know why? Because okra and mallow are in the same family, Malvaceae. So these fruits are an amazing addition to a dinner, but you got to also consider it's very mucilaginous like okra. That's one thing people often don't like about okra is how mucilaginous it is, kind of slimy. But it's really, really good. I like it. Give it a try. Even if you don't like okra, just give it a try, see if you like it. You can always spit it out. But I actually like to fry it when it's still in the husk as well. That husk has a lot of flavor to it, so I'll leave the seed husk on. And once again, you know, obviously, if you're taking the seeds off, you're stopping that plant from reproducing. And these green seeds, like I said, are not viable, so you can't replant this. This is not going to turn into a plant. Once the seed becomes kind of brownish black and then hard, that's when it's a viable seed, right? And then you can also take those seeds, those black and brownish seeds, when they're hard and viable, and you can use those as food, right? You could soak them for a bit if you want to soak them and make them a little bit softer and more bioavailable, make the nutrients more bioavailable, and you can grind them up like a flour. You could use them in like seed balls, like seed nut balls. The indigenous people of this land would make things called canola, which is basically, my understanding, where they would take seeds, grind them up, and then add some kind of fat from an animal, or perhaps some kind of in-season fruit, and then make these little balls called canola. So you can make kind of an invasivore canola dish using these ripe mallow seeds. So there's many different uses. There's also a myriad of medicinal uses to this guy. Medicinal uses are, once again, that mucilaginous quality. So if you take a tea of mallow, it's going to coat your throat, it's going to coat your insides with that kind of mucilage. And it's really, really nice if you're in a very dry situation, like say during fire season out here when it gets really smoky in the air sometimes, and you know people are having sore throats and it just kind of dries your insides out. Make a tea of this leaf, and it will really coat your throat. It can really relieve sore throat. So it's an amazing plant to use in that regard. People also use the roots in that regard. And once again, of course, if you're pulling up a plant and using its roots, you're going to basically be killing the plant. So you know, use that at your own discretion in your own context, depending on what you're going for as far as eradication or preservation goes. But at least know how it operates. But once again, just a highly, highly amazing edible and medicinal plant, and really great to add into the diet. You're probably going to know this one from around town. So yeah, and you know, we're in a very urban setting right now. We're in Berkeley, California. There's cars passing by, and the plant's just thriving. It's one that I see quite often, even when it's really dry out, when it hasn't rained in months. Super tough plant. Absolutely love it, and hope you'll enjoy it as well. So that's mallow for you. Happy harvesting to everybody.
All right, cool, cool. Hopefully everyone was able to see that and glean some information from it. Sounds like some of y'all already knew a bit about mallow, which is good. And yeah, it's a really amazing plant. Something that I eat quite frequently, and I'm not sure if I touched on the flowers too much in that, but the flowers are a great way to recognize it. Y'all see those kind of purple and the white going through it. Those are really amazing to add to salads. I think I did touch on that a little bit. But I often make several of these videos, and I'm not sure which one got which information in it. Mallow tea is absolutely amazing. Yeah, I just skimmed over the roots. It's not something that I've used a whole lot, but people do make things from the roots. People will sometimes use the roots in a soup, and it'll have that mucilaginous quality, and it will kind of create a thicker soup. And then people use the roots medicinally as well to like boil into a tea. Typically, when you're using roots for tea, you want to make what's called a decoction. So that would be like cutting it up really nice, washing it off, of course, cutting it up really nice, and then putting it and then like boiling it in water and then simmering it for about 45 minutes is typical with most roots, barks, things that are harder to extract, some mushrooms. If you want to get that kind of medicine out of it, that would be one way to go. Yeah, mallow can also really help with digestion if your digestion is a little sluggish. Definitely something cool to incorporate into the diet. And the whole thing about um, the cheese wheel seeds is cooking those up. The okra taste is amazing. And I don't know if y'all caught that, but keeping that part that's on the outside of the seed, keeping that on, there's a lot of flavor in that. But yeah, like Joanna was asking, can you eat the seeds raw? You can totally eat them raw when they're green like that. Once they get black, they're going to be too hard to chew through. But that's when I was talking about they're mature at that point, so you could take them and grind them up like a flour and get creative with them. You can toast them a little bit, add them into different things, lots of different ways. And it's a really prolific plant. There's also, I have to mention this, there's some native mallows around. Most of the ones that you come in contact with around the city are going to be invasive mallows, unless it's planted in someone's like native plant yard. But if you start to go out, let's see, this says running out of the 40-minute time limit on your grouping. Okay, so we can go a little bit over. That's what Zoom's saying, go over 40 minutes a little bit. But we won't go too far over. But yeah, so there's certain mallows out there that are native mallows. So we might want to treat those a little bit differently because those aren't things that you see a whole lot. But if you go out into scrublands, if you go out to places that are more wild, you might run into some plants that look really similar to what we just identified, but they're going to typically be a little bit lighter colored. The green hue is almost more grayish with those native mallows, and the flowers are going to look quite different as well. So like I was saying, with anything wild, just be very, very 100% about what you're foraging and harvesting. And, feel free to shoot me text. Most of you have my information, shoot me a message on Facebook or wherever you know me from. And you can ask me, and a lot of times I could be like, I know 100% I can ID mallow over a picture. But, the best way is to have somebody, if you're unsure, right there with you who knows the plant, who's eaten it before. But yeah, that's some stuff about mallow. Any more questions on that? We have one more edible. I got kind of a bonus few edibles in there at the end of this next video too. All right, people good? Okay. Go ahead, Joanna. She says, I want to make sure I understand what you just said. Okay. So you're asking, so are native mallows not edible, just the invasive? Great question. I didn't quite touch into that. To my understanding, I haven't eaten many native mallows, but I believe that family is all pretty edible. But more of what I was touching on with that rant is to kind of leave those mallows alone more because they're not as prolific. Most of what you're going to see, like I said, around the city is going to be invasive mallows. You see it kind of growing. Like I was by the library in Berkeley when I was giving you guys my spot, but that's where I was at, like right by a really major, I think MLK is right there. And you'll see it like growing out of landscapes. You'll see it growing out of cracks in the sidewalk. And just to reiterate, like there's some that are really small, like prostrate versions of mallow that are growing out of the sidewalk and are like really tiny. And then there's some like the one I was showing y'all that's 10 feet tall. And then there's more commonly, you'll see ones that are maybe 2-3 feet, and they grow in people's gardens as well. So it's something you're going to inevitably come across. And I guarantee you've seen it before. And if you haven't, you're going to start seeing it. because our reticular activation system is strong. When you know of something, you will all of a sudden start seeing it more. So let's jump into our last video. Cool. And this one we're going to be talking, this is a short video. This is, I think, just over a minute, if even that. And this is going to show you guys miner's lettuce, which is a very, very common edible. I imagine some of y'all have probably eaten this before. And what this video really aims to do is kind of show you how to harvest it so it'll come back year after year. And there'll be a few little surprise weeds in here at the end that we'll get to see as well. We can talk more about those if y'all are interested. So here we go.
All right, here's how I do my miner's lettuce harvesting. Cut off a couple of little leaves, or big leaves, these are pretty big, from a few plants. I'm not really trying to harvest the whole plant. They're very easy to uproot if you're not being careful with them. So you will stop the plant from going to seed, from proliferating, if you do harvest the whole plant. And I want these to keep going. This is in a sweet little urban setting. This abandoned farm that's right in the heart of Berkeley. And there's just a ton of edible greens out here, including miner's lettuce and chickweed, oxalis, there's some mala right there, a bunch of stuff, pellitory, and then there's some cleavers back there, tons of stuff. But yeah, just wanted to give a little bit of how-to on how I harvest stuff, so maybe it'll inspire others to harvest.
All right. Let's see, that's that whole video right there. Yeah, that's all for that video. Very short and sweet. And yeah, let me just get a feel on, have people eaten miner's lettuce before? If anyone wants a little bit more ID help on that one, the plants that I was harvesting in that video are like kind of that kind of shape, right? Almost like a spade. But miner's lettuce can look quite different at different stages. And it's a good one to know at all the stages, because you can pick it when it's really, really tiny, or like right now, you're gonna find it more like a lily pad shape. All right. So yeah, let's go a little more into the ID. And I'm wondering if you guys can hear me when I share my screen. I think you can. So I'm gonna try that. Share my screen so I can show you all a picture of what it looks like when it's a little more mature. So here we go. Let's see. Is it gonna let me do this? Okay, I'm gonna bring up my Chrome here. Got a picture of miner's lettuce right here, Claytonia perfoliata. Can you guys hear me? Can you give me a little head shake if you can hear me? Okay, cool, good. So yeah, one thing that this illustrates too is knowing the Latin names of things is really, really important. And I really encourage you, if you're gonna go out and learn plants, to learn the Latin names. Look into that a little bit deeper. It's not as hard as it sounds. It's very nerdy sounding, but it always gets down to what that plant is. That plant will only have that genus and that species, and it gets right down to it. But plants can share many common names. You guys heard me talk about chickweed a little bit in that last video, and there's a few different plants called chickweed. They're all edible, but there's only that one chickweed, Stellaria media, that's the one that you really want to harvest. So just knowing, this one's name is Claytonia perfoliata, miner's lettuce. And this is a picture of what it looks like when it's in flower. So it's more like, these are smaller versions, but it can be totally round at times. The edges are not gonna have any kind of teeth. It's very succulent. And it's also, are there hairs on it or not? I wish I had a piece to look at. They're pretty smooth. They have this kind of speckled whiteness to them. You see how these flowers are white right here? They can sometimes be kind of pinkish or purplish as well. So flower color is often a very bad indicator to follow. You want to have multiple identifiers for anything that you're identifying when it comes to wild plants. Flower color is one of the worst, I find. But you can see there's 5 little petals there that are broken in half. And you're going to find this kind of growing in little clusters, right? And often with other plants, often with other miner's lettuce plants. And they can be anywhere from like a big whopping leaf, like the size of your face almost, down to like really, really small ones, just depending on where they're growing um, and how much water they've gotten is a huge factor. And then also shade. They're going to very often be growing in dappled shade. So if you see them in full sun, they're going to quite often be really small specimens. And I'm going to stop sharing the screen. And if you see them in, really damp places that are get more shade, they're going to be quite larger typically. So hope that helps a little bit. And let's see, a couple questions here. Hopefully that helped a little bit with the ID. Once again, they're one of those that there's not any kind of poison lookalikes that I would think about, something you would worry. With most things, it's not 100% true, but you can put a little bit in your mouth and chew it up and spit it out, right? Like I said, not 100% true. There's some things out there that can give people really bad reactions, like poison hemlock is probably the number one thing you should know about. Feel free to look that one up. Looks like a carrot almost. And those can give you a bad reaction just from chewing on it for some people. Um, so not 100% across the board to chew things up, but with something like miner's lettuce, if you're kind of thinking it is, it's going to taste very succulent. It's kind of like lettuce in a way, but it's not going to be like crunchy necessarily. It's going to be more like soft, kind of like purslane if you've ever eaten that weed before. It's often compared to that. And it should taste pretty mild with like some, nice green overtones to it. If something's really bitter, really nasty tasting, that's often a good indicator to spit it out and not move forward with it. Not 100%. Some things, radishes and whatnot can taste really bitter once they're in flower, but they're good when they're cooked. But with miner's lettuce, it's going to be a little more bitter when it's in flower, but it's still going to be pretty good. It's not going to taste terrible. Okay, so a couple other questions, not to change the topic from miners. Let us, do you know much about pellitory? Allergic to many, but not me. Do you know if it's edible? My chickens love it. Great question. Pellitory is one of the plants that we skimmed over at the very end of that video. And yeah, it's definitely an allergen for a lot of people right now. So if you're feeling any kind of stuffy nose stuff going on, you don't necessarily have any kind of crazy communicative diseases. You might just have an allergy to pellitory or oak trees. There's a lot of things that are flowering and sending out pollen right now. But pellitory, it is technically edible. And what I hear more about it being used is as medicine. So it's often growing out of the side of your house. It's called pellitory of the wall is one common name for it because it's growing like out of the side of a wall. And people use it for medicine once it's in flower. When it's when it's younger, it can be used for food. It can be used in like wild pestos and whatnot, which is one of my favorite ways to make a lot of these plants, especially the kind of spikier ones. Make it palatable by using pesto, putting it into a pesto. But yeah, pellitory is usually used in like an alcohol tincture. And I know it's a very like effective diuretic. I believe it's antimicrobial, things like that. Something worth looking up. Not one I've worked with a ton, but it's in the nettle family. And so with most nettles, once they're flowering, you don't want to eat them a whole lot because they start to produce this stuff on the leaves that can cause urinary and kidney problems. So I apply that same rule to pellitory, even though I haven't found any literature on that. Once it's in flower, which it goes from really small to flower very fast. So there's a very small window you can catch it for edibility. But I'm not really messing with eating a whole lot of pellitory. I'll kind of nibble on it, but it's a little sticky, a little clingy. But yeah, probably a great one for chickens, I imagine. And then another question, these are growing everywhere now, but they go away in summer, right? Do they need more rain? So yeah, you're asking Brianna um, about miner's lettuce, and yes, it does go away in the summer. We're kind of towards the end of the season in a lot of places for it. It has a wide range across the West Coast, so I can't speak to all of that, but here in the Bay Area, it's starting to flower. It's going to be going to seed pretty soon. And it's not necessarily just moisture with miner's lettuce, though people do grow it as a garden annual in the summertime sometimes. You can buy it at nurseries in certain places. You can buy seed for it. But it really likes cool weather and it likes shade. So in my experience, it's been extremely tough for me to try to propagate this plant. I've tried everything from self-seeding it to taking little plants and re-putting them in my garden from wild places, and it's often a really tough one. So I just kind of collect it when it's in season, enjoy it, and then wait for it next year. And like I was showing in that video, taking a few leaves from it is good from just a few plants, but once those flowers, like there's going to be flowers on every single one of those lily pad looking leaves, and every single one of those that you take, you're stopping those from reseeding. So if you can just take a couple from each plant, the plant can still produce a lot of seed. And if you're taking things like, we were looking at um, the chickweed's often growing right next to miner's lettuce. And if you can start to take the chickweed out of the equation and use that as a salad green, which is amazing. It's also a great medicine. People dry it for teas. It's a very, very common weed. It will help that miner's lettuce patch to proliferate because they're often kind of working together, but also in a bit of a competition. So removing chickweed can help miner's lettuce to keep going, if that makes sense. Um, but yeah, those are the 3 videos I got for y'all. I'm gonna open it up for a couple of minutes. We're going a little bit over time, so if you need to go, totally fine. Really appreciate everyone joining. It's been amazing getting to talk to y'all. And feel free to type in some questions. I can hang around for a couple more minutes. And yeah, type this at the top if y'all saw it. But I'm doing a 2-hour class on Sunday from 1:30 to 3:30 Pacific time. And thank you, Joanna. Really appreciate you coming out. But yeah, I'll be doing that class. And if you guys want to dive a little bit deeper into this, we're going to be covering at least 7 plants or so, if not more, and talking a little bit more about medicinal and culinary uses as well, because there's a ton of stuff out there. It's like the end of green season right now. We're getting towards that. And it's just a really great time to start learning those things. It's a good time to identify them while they're in flower too. So yeah, feel free if you want to share that with people. It's really cool to be able to share on this platform because I can reach different audiences, which is awesome. So if you know anyone who's interested, please share. And I'll be doing more of these too. So thank you all for coming out. And yeah, I got a request. Can you go over nettles next time, please? Yeah, I can absolutely. I'll write that down right now. We can talk about nettles. It's a good time to talk about them too because they are going to be flowering in the next couple of months, and it's better to get them right now. Yes, yes. And appreciate knowledge information. It's time to learn more about people experience. Awesome, awesome. Thank you all so much. Appreciate the feedback, and yeah, really awesome having everybody. So if there's no more questions, I'm about to sign off, but you guys feel free to shoot me messages over Facebook or Instagram or however you like to get in contact. All right. Thanks, everybody. Thank you, Cindy. Cool. All right. Signing out. Happy harvesting, y'all.